Okay, welcome everybody, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Paul Barber to our first presentation in the second Meetup series, Constructivist Meetup series. Paul is an executive team and leadership development coach. His interests in the psychology of teams began during a successful 20-year career as a senior leader in Kerry Group PLC, one of the world's largest food and ingredients businesses. An award-winning student on the Henley Business School MSc in Coaching and Behavioural Change, Paul was also awarded Best Newcomer to Personal Construct Psychology at the Personal Construct Conference in Edinburgh University in 2018. Paul is a writer and speaker with strong interests in conflict resolution, human needs, and team coaching. He is the co-author with Lucy Widdowson of the book Building Top Performing Teams.
Thank you, Harry.
It was a pleasure to advise him on his important work in looking at how the politicians on the two sides in Northern Ireland construe themselves and the people on the other side in a very creative use of the perceiver element grid, or PEG. And I remember Paul saying, perhaps more than once, that participants had said that they something like, you know, I never knew I would say all this. And I thought that showed nicely what a powerful interview format the PEG provides us. And I think you're going to have a little bit of a look at that today as well, Paul.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let me hand over to you. Welcome.
Very good. Well, thank you, Harry, for your help when I was doing the research. And I'm really pleasure to be here today. Can all hear me okay? Yeah. I speak very fast. People in Northern Ireland don't really speak. We kind of sing. So it's sort of like, if I speak too fast, just tell me to slow down and I'll try and speak slower so you can understand me okay. Before I put up the PowerPoint slides, I just want to get the chat going, okay? So where are you from? I'm not going to ask you to say it because I've learned in these Zoom experiences when you do that, it could take us about 2 hours to do this first bit alone. So where are you from and what have you been putting your energy into today so far? What have you been putting your energy? So where are you from, dialing in from? And what have you been putting your energy into today so far? Okay. And as you know, when people are sharing that in chat, I'll share, I'm from Northern Ireland. It's about I live about 20 miles south of Belfast in a little village called Warringstown. Not that big. But nowhere in Northern Ireland is too big. I consider myself, if I drive an hour and a half any direction except towards the south of Ireland, I go into the water. So it's a very, very small part of the world, very, very small part of the world. And we've got Dennis from London. And in terms of my energy today, I've been putting into work. I've been busy all day. I was traveling this week. I was in London, back home again, and just a busy morning doing work type stuff is where all of my energy has been, and a few interactions with my teenage kids as well, as they wanted things. So where are you joining from and what have you been putting your energy in today? So Dennis joining from London, and today he's been writing, okay. And Jana from Belgrade, Serbia, lovely, very good. Now moved to Amsterdam, oh, very good. And looking for a job, okay, well, all the best for that continued search. Hampton, UK, download from Harry, these are neighbours. Putting together this presentation. Okay, very good. Next session's presentation. Good luck with that. Harry, a nice country walk and getting ready for this meeting. Best thing. Anybody else? Anybody else? I know sometimes the chat, if you're working on a phone, can be hard to use or a small device. What about Belgrade, Serbia? Somebody here, Sharon from Sheffield, had pottery group for 11s this morning. Lovely, very good. Is that right, pottery? Yeah. Adele, West Kent. I've been gardening. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I have trees at the back that need pruning, so I'm feeling guilty now. And then I'm on Perthshire, Scotland. Oh, I love Scotland. I love all the other places you're from, by the way, but Scotland's we've done a lot of holidays. Morning thinking about clients, and the afternoon foraging for mushrooms. Wow, isn't that wonderful? Sounds amazing. Exeter, Parham, resubmitting a paper to a journal, and then writing reports for students. Very good. Nicola, finishing making a meal, which I haven't turned on the camera yet. Yeah, we're very welcome to watch you cook as well if you want. That's absolutely fine. I'm always amazed on these Zoom calls over the last couple of years, what people really are doing during the call. And it's kind of like, we can go on the call but not be fully present because we've got other things going on. I understand that. We've got Seamus, Manchester, originally Derry. Very good. You'll understand my accent, Seamus. And coming back from the Lake District with growing up and sick kids. Oh. And then Michael from USA, Boston, trying to transform the shelves of my first year college. The shelves, I thought the shelves, the cells, that's more profound, of my first year college students. That's why I'm crying. Oh, thank you, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. We could do a whole session that alone. So just change topic. Very good. The second question I'm going to ask somebody who's currently rewriting curriculums for course lectures. The second question I'm going to put in the chat: which worlds or societal conflicts are you most emotionally invested in? Which world or societal conflicts are you most emotionally invested in? And I'll give you some examples. For me, I'm heavily invested in Northern Ireland and the troubles and everything that happened there and that conflict, and that's because I'm from here. But I'm also very interested in politics of left and right, and I spend too much time watching television and reading about the world and what's happening. But it could be things like transgender rights, it could be abortion, it could be anything at all. But there's so many things that we invest ourselves emotionally. And I assume for most people, it's not one thing. There could be a list of 2 or 3 or 4 things, and that's okay too. Well, I want to get a sense, what gets you riled? What gets you thinking? What gets you involved in debate? Or what even secretly or silently, you might even watch things and think about it, but not maybe ever get to speak about it. Dennis into Russia. Okay, and I've very close family friends who are both from Russia, and we have some wonderful debates about life and things. It's fascinating. I was expecting that to come up, Harry. Israel, Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could be the most difficult of all, couldn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've some friends who are on both sides of that particular conflict, and it's just a fascinating what's going on. Michael, okay, yeah, I was expecting to see that one as well, Michael, so I'm glad to see somebody put it up. The political partisan polarization, left, right in the USA. Yeah, that's probably one that I watch and read an awful lot about. And it seems rather trivial, of course, when compared to the deep problems of Afghanistan and so forth. Yeah, I'm not so sure that's the case, because I think it all reflects America's so big and so important that what happens in America has an impact in the world. And it's political extremism of both left and right. Yeah, now, Michael, we're so aligned in that, it's unbelievable. So aligned there. Afghanistan, yeah, absolutely. Sandy, poverty, LGBTQ rights, educational inequality. Okay, yeah, that's a massive one. Jenny, conflicts always disturb me. At the moment, it would be what's happening in Afghanistan. Yeah, it's quite immediate. And Brexit and Palestine. Yeah, all 3 amazing examples. Okay, Palestine and Afghanistan. David, thank you. Andy, Andre, usually work in Balkan, probably the Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict. Yeah, that's one I actually know very little about. Yeah. James and you've come to the right place. UK, US, Middle East, and the connection between. Very good. Adele, increasing inequalities in the UK. Yeah. I think there's things that we aren't as visible about. They're not talked about as much in the news, but they're there. Afghanistan right now, yeah. And then supporting with the Quakers for the UK. Yeah, Sharon, that's a big topic that's getting bigger and bigger in the next period. The Super League, yep, somebody put in the football. Yeah. Egoism, altruism, and tribalism. Yeah, absolutely. Oh wow, I wasn't expecting as many. This is fantastic, the list. Ukraine, Russia, yep, absolutely. I told you my Russian friends, one part of the marriage are from Russian Ukrainians, another part isn't. So you can imagine the debate they have in their own house is quite fascinating. And I normally bring up the topic for discussion, and it's probably not always the wisest thing to do, but yeah, it's quite fascinating. And global warming, absolutely. So folks, later on, we're going to be asking you to reflect using a particular model on to agree on a particular issue and to use this approach to take the view of one party. So that list on the chat later on, you can go back to, and you're going to be picking things from to use as we speak later on. Just going to share my screen here. Okay, if this comes up okay. Oh, see that okay? Yep. Does somebody give me a thumbs up? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
The topic I want to speak about is rules and conflict, and I'll explain a little bit later on why I use that term. And we've just done that there in terms of those two questions. And it's important for me to get a feel of where you are, what you're doing at the minute, and what you're thinking. And what I know already is that there's a lot of people very passionate about these things in the world, like myself, and it's really important to think about our own contribution to them. And we might say, well, we're not there, but I believe we all have a greater influence than we ever can imagine. And so I think it's important that we think about our own contributions to these things. And what I want to do today is my own experiences of the Northern Ireland conflict, having grown up there, share how they've influenced my career and my research, and especially using Kelly's sociality and clarity. And my intention is to challenge us just to reflect and just think about these broader frozen conflicts and how we might be able to think and possibly act into that. And that could be through writing, advocacy, or anything, or direct involvement. A few things about myself, just to give you a bit of a context. The first top left-hand side is my 3 daughters. This photograph is actually about 5 years old, or 6 years old, so I should update it. But I do have to get permission from my daughters every time I show a picture. And it's a really complicated negotiation to get a picture that they all agree on. So I just happen to stay with this one because they agree on it and they love this picture, and it brings back a great memory from them as well. But my 3 kids are my inspiration for why I think about the way, what I think about life and why I do what I do. The second picture is Tullymore Forest Park. And it's just a picture of a place in Northern Ireland. It's a very, very small geography, very, very small geography, but it's had a massive impact in the world. And I don't know the exact figure, I think it's 23 or 27 US presidents have their link to the Ulster region of Ireland.
Gosh.
That is, I think it's 23. It's quite incredible. There's only been, I think, is it 47 presidents? Let me know the exact number at the minute. But it's a disproportionately high number of US presidents have their direct link to a very, very small part of Ireland, the Ulster region. And that, I just find that incredible. That could be a whole topic in itself. Is that a good influence or a bad influence? Is a different question, which I'm not going to. And the third thing I just want to mention is what informs my work is coaching. I'm going to mention a little bit more about that. And I actually believe that once you've experienced coaching, something can fundamentally change in a person. It's just a really, really powerful way of working. And something I feel very, very passionate about. A coaching approach to leadership, to teams, to everything. And the fourth thing is what I call my research interest. And they're twofold. Effectively, collaboration brings it all together. And I had the pleasure of publishing from my master's research in this paper here, and Harry was very influential in terms of the actual research itself. I'd like to thank him for that, and for everybody involved in the critiquing the paper. It was a difficult process. The whole critique process back and forth was my second time doing that ever, and the last time was about 15 years ago, and it was marketing, so it's a very different thing for me. But I'm really, really worthwhile, and I thank everybody who's involved. Some of the people on this call who were involved in that process, eternally grateful, and thank you for sticking with it. And the other piece here, the book, I'd never written a book before until published in January this year. Probably outside of the paper, the hardest thing I've ever done. Really, really difficult, but one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And we're getting really good feedback from people, and some of the top organizations in the world have bought it for their senior leadership teams. I was working with a team this week of a large organization, global organization. So this idea of having an influence, beyond, it really, really inspires me. And what I want to do now, I want to get away from me, and you want to get used. And one of the things I mentioned, coaching really informs my world and my work. And that's what I've been spending a lot of time studying. And I'll mention a little bit later on about coaching and personal construct psychology and where my head is in that. But before I go any further, I'd like to, one of the things we talk about an awful lot in coaching is that we talk about just the power of connection. when two human beings deeply connect with each other, it goes beyond personality traits and culture and difference that we have. And I see this all the time. I've done this exercise this week with a senior executive team. I got them to reflect on their personal purpose using like picture cards and then share. And we had people in the room who described themselves as nihilists. We had people in the room who described themselves as highly religious. And what happened when they were sharing was connections happened. And people started to see the human being despite the labels type thing, and people started to connect. So I want to give you all the opportunity to connect deeply. So the question I'm asking you is, like, you know, in groups of, I think Sandy would say of groups of 3 to 4. So I know some people mightn't actually join a breakout group, or they could be doing something, but at least as long as there's 2 people speaking. If you end up in a group and there's only yourself, please come back to the main room and we'll make sure we put you in with somebody. But in groups of 3 to 4, just to share and use an image or an object. It could be a picture of a family. It could be an object that you have nearby. What is your deeper personal purpose in life? Okay. What is your deeper personal purpose in life? You know, why do you do? I put that image up there just saying, you know, what is your why? Why do you do what you do? Okay. So you're just about to go into the break room. We're going to give you 15 minutes. So enjoy your conversation and just break out the time of 15 minutes between the 3 of you, okay, or 4, whoever many's in the room.
Cool.
Sandy, we shouldn't be in a group together. But we're not. We're supposed to be in a breakup. You're unassigned, Sandy.
So,
Oh, I lost it. Oh,
hopefully.
So thank you, folks, for I don't know what was happening here, but I know in our room we were having a very interesting conversation about what is purpose and our own personal perspectives on the word purpose or purposeful, and then getting into broader conversations. It was fascinating. And the idea, I was just saying there at the end of a call, the idea when I work with Barham said something about conflict, which is totally relevant to everything today. This idea about finding common ground while retaining our individual identity is a key to it. And one of the things I would do a lot when I work with teams is that, you know, I get people to reflect on their personal purpose or the interests of things that drive them. But then I get them to reflect on what is their collective purpose, what are they trying to do together. But you don't lose the individual thing. That's core to who you are. So it's that idea of both. So I'm just going to bring up my slides here again because let's see if we can do that. So just a couple of things before we get on to the main bit here. You know, I'm an executive and team coach. And when I first came across, and this probably hopefully is an interesting perspective of, I know some of you have been involved in personal concepts of psychology for a big part of your lives, and I understand that. For me, I was only introduced to it probably 2017. And this quote really, really struck me. No one needs to paint themselves into a corner. No one needs to be completely hemmed in by circumstances. No one needs to be the victim of his bibliography. And where I'm from, we have a lot of victims of bibliography. We have a lot of victims of basically, you know, what street you were born decides on how you will think in life and how you will act. And this is true the world over. You know, I often find that where I'm from is Northern Ireland is like a social experiment of broader society, not one that, you know, to be proud of, but it does give you interesting perspectives. And from a coaching point of view, there's a paper in 2010, and it basically talked about an invitation to personal construct coaching, from personal construct therapy to personal construct coaching. And one of the things that it talked about, I've read various things over the years that coaching's always been about this idea of partnering with somebody and experimentation about their future. And one of the comments made in the paper that personal construct perspectives of coaching as an experimentation with the client's personal theories. And that's a very good description of what coaching is for me. You know, where it's an experimentation about what the future could hold, about ideas. And the paper argued that that the ideas of personal construct theory suggested that it can be based on principles of coaching psychology even before the term coaching gained wider attention. So it was doing this here. Coaching probably is a term 25, 30 years really gained popularity. And then the paper discussed reconstruction or change in personal theories. So I'd argue today that while I'm not at the expertise level of what many people are in this call, in my world of coaching, I think I'm tapping into something in this area. And a couple of things, I've been involved in this research and the characteristics of top performing teams, which resulted in this particular book. But more recently, and I felt quite conscious doing that, I referred to personal construct psychology once in the book and give an example. And there's 42 tools and techniques. And I actually felt guilty. And Harry, it was something you'd said to me, made me feel guilty, that one of my tools and techniques in the book I was co-authoring didn't involve something inspired by personal construct psychology. So Harry, I've rectified that. And in a book that's coming out this year, it's not totally available yet, but I ended up, I put a model into the book, which is inspired by the thinking and the research in the article, and I called it Playing the Full Game. And the book basically has got 200 odd tools and techniques in it. Some of the top people in the world in coaching have been involved in this book. And so I was really, really proud to get something from personal construct psychology in that book, inspired by it. And I thought I'd done well.
Oh, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I know I shouldn't be in this state, but I've never actually been completely sure about what coaching is.
Yeah, well, probably the best way I describe it is a partnership between, if it's two individuals, it's a partnership between two individuals about their journey or their growth. And
so it's an equal. There's no hierarchy. It's two equals.
You try and remove the hierarchy. That it's like the common factors research, and it's based on therapy as well. That it's about the relationship. And I guess and I know there's lots of psychotherapists on the call. One of the things we define when you're contracting for coaching is it's very much about the future, so that versus therapy. And so what we'd say, if we're coaching somebody and they mention something from the past, we tend to ask them, how does that influence your current and your future? We don't go and dig into that as such. We're very much future focused.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you won't let somebody talk about the past. You will, but you don't stay there. So as it's a very future focused conversation between two individuals. And again, you could do a whole call on that as well. So you do a whole call on that as well. But thanks for asking, Harry. And I was happy that I got in the book mentioned this is just an image in the book of one of the 200 tools. Several pages later, I found this here. There's actually a tool in there, personal constructs using the repertoire grid by Ruth Price. Do you know Ruth Price? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I didn't know. So none of the authors in this book were actually communicating. We're all done it separately. So it's really so my point is here, from a point of view of coaching, personal construct psychology is finding its way into coaching at the minute. And this is proved even further by these two books here. One out last year, one out this year.
Yeah.
Just to prove that point further as happening. Okay. So just to be aware of, and it's just something that, from a coaching point of view, there's more and more of it coming in. And I think that's to be encouraged. So just in terms of Northern Ireland, this is a little picture of my beloved homeland. Okay. I love this picture because this picture to me has no border. It has got no people on it. It's got mountains, and it's just got, and it's the thing in Ireland that brings everybody together is like the place. Anybody from Ireland, north or south, anybody from any community, the one thing we can agree on is that we love the land we live on. We love the nature. We love where it's set. We love that we're an island. I don't know if we love the weather, but we talk about the weather a lot. If you meet anybody from Ireland, they ask what's the weather like, and we talk about rain and wind and storms and everything else. But I just love this picture because it just brings us back to to basics. And in terms of this here image here, this is my granny's farmland. And on the left-hand side is the south of the Republic of Ireland. And on the right-hand side is Northern Ireland. And this river is an international border, which has caused a lot of problems and still does cause a lot of problems. And, you know, I just loved going up here when I was growing up. I still love going here. My granny's 90 this year. She actually just went blind in the last 6 months, which is just heartbreaking for us all. But we would, as kids, jump across this river and play cowboys and Indians. And what I could never understand as a child, that across on the left-hand side, there was a family that lived across the left-hand side who were from a different nationality, a different ethnic background, let's call it, from my family on the right-hand side. But they were very, very close friends for hundreds of years. And then the Troubles came along and the friendships got very, very strained. And the Troubles went away and the friendships have improved. And it always made me really curious as to how can friends become enemies? How can friends actually get to the point where they're willing to kill each other? And there is a story that I was told of my two ancestors' relations ended up on opposite sides back in the late 50s of what was called the Troubles before the Troubles, nearly. And there's a story one time whereby one member on the left-hand side and over the border was asked to shoot his neighbor over here, which was my granda. And I was asking my granny about, is this true? I said, yeah, they fired a few shots at each other, but they were never going to kill each other because they're too good of friends. So they were acting out a conflict on behalf of their various parties, but they were never going to do anything bad to each other because they were too close. So it just fascinates me of how this happens. And this quote here from Rumi, I love this. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there, and when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. And when I go to my granny, I think we should bring the whole country to this little field. When you're down at that stream, all the, you know, the commonality that we have between us becomes real, and we realize. But for me, it's very personal. This is a picture of an explosion that happened in 1991. 4 people died in this explosion. My dad was meant to be there. And the night this happened, at that point, it was the biggest explosion in the Troubles that happened at that point. And in our house, 15 miles away, our house shook from the force of this explosion. And it was just, and things like that don't leave you, never leave you. And actually what happens is guilt. You know, you feel a guilt because I have lots of friends who lost parents in the Troubles. And I didn't. And you feel a guilt, a survivor's guilt that you survived that, but there's a guilt that comes with that. So, but it's very, very personal. I probably know about 30 people in the round where I grew up who were killed, and that doesn't even count in the people who were injured. And this is, I'm not going to say the positive side of it, okay, but I'm always amazed. You look somewhere like Syria and you see kids still smiling and laughing, and yet the world around them is falling apart. A lot of this comes from your family, and I grew up in a very stable family that even though there was mayhem around me, we seem to enjoy life, and it doesn't make sense, but it's what happens. And this is an example. This is a bomb that went off very close to my school. And when this happened, we got a few days off school. So as a child, I think it was 12 or 13 at this particular time, we were delighted. Nobody was killed in this, okay, so which was good. But as children, we were actually like going like, wow, we're off school for a few days. And there used to be bomb scares and different things that would, bring us little moments of brightness in a very dark period. Mm. And when you think of Northern Ireland and the Troubles, basically it's framed by 30 years, 1968 to 1998, the Good Friday Agreement. And 3,600 deaths mightn't sound a lot in the context of, one death is too much in my opinion. But to some people that mightn't sound a lot, but it's a very small population. It's now 1.8 million, but it was 1.5 million at the time on average. And it's the equivalent of 125,000 people dying in the UK, or the equivalent of 500,000 people dying in America. Okay, so just to give you the context of it, it's for people locally, and there's one particular study has estimated up to 500,000 people, so nearly 1/3 of people were directly affected by the Troubles. And the Troubles, people ask, is it based on religion? And, and I've always said it's more complicated than that. And I love this little infographic here. And this quote here, based on political ideologies and societal ethnic identities that happen to be divided along religious lines. I love that quote. That to me sums it up. And this little infographic shows you just Northern Ireland, or to some people it's called the North of Ireland. A lot of people will not use the term Northern Ireland because they want to be part of the South and they call it the North of Ireland, and that's okay. And other people call it Northern Ireland. But you can see here parts that are 60% where people identify more as British than Irish. And then you've got bits here at green where people identify as more than Irish, more Irish than British. And people ask me what my identity is. I say I'm British and Irish, and I'm very proud of that. So I would even struggle to get on this infographic. Okay. And this idea that, you know, I'm British and Irish, both identities are important to me. Both identities are important to me. And it's really important. The actual Good Friday Agreement that was signed in 1998, the morning it was signed, I remember waking up and listening to the news, and I cried. I cry at movies normally and things like that. I don't normally cry at politics. I don't remember the last time politics made me cry, but that morning I cried. But it was controversial. I cried with happiness. But I know people, I have friends who cried with sadness that same morning. And it was controversial because of prisoner release was one of the big things. And I have a friend, 3 friends, and they lost their father. And one of them called me a traitor because I supported the agreement. And he called me a traitor because his dad had been lost in the Troubles, and he just couldn't ever get his head around the fact that how could we agree to that? How could that be agreed to? It was controversial because ex-paramount was in government, and that is still very controversial to right now to today. Probably as it's controversial right now as it was 20 years on from the agreement. And victims feeling betrayed, that doesn't seem to have rebated any way whatsoever. You know, and as a society, we haven't dealt with that. We haven't dealt with that at all. It's challenging. It's stop-starts. We have a local assembly that was the output of the agreement. It was actually frozen there for nearly 2.5, 3 years. It's back up again now for the last 2 years. Some people believe only for COVID it might have fallen again. But it's very unstable, very unstable. And there are political and social casualties. And the political casualties are the 2 main parties that actually made the agreement are no longer in power. You know, they reduced in size significantly. So I think there's a great study there in leadership, true leadership. And I don't think either party would do not regret making the agreement, despite it leading to their loss of power. And I think sometimes leadership with leadership comes great responsibility, which we don't often see. And I think this is an example where real leadership was shown. And that quote there, the Good Friday Agreement has produced what may be characterized as a fragile and incomplete peace. I think that sums up for me. And some of the things just currently going on is political polarization. So our 2 main parties couldn't be any more different. I mean, literally, the 2 parties that made the agreement were the biggest parties at the time, and they were both quite liberal. And what happened then, as things went stop-start, the 2 biggest parties now are much more in the extremes. Michael mentioned earlier on about the left and right in America, but much more in the extremes, Sinn Féin and the DUP. You'll have heard of both of them. And there's like a political stalemate, despite the agreement, the structure of the agreement holds it all together, albeit in a very fragile way. The contested past, we haven't agreed. There's not an agreed identity narrative about the past. It just doesn't exist. And both parties or both communities have a very different view of the past, and we don't really talk about it. And history in schools doesn't really talk about it in any sort of positive way. And there's continued segregation. I think it's 94% of all children go to a school that is either where both of the main faiths are basically kept apart. 6% is an integrated education. So we very much have a psychological, physical separation still. So 20 years on from a peace agreement, you know, we're still very much apart. And yet there's a lot of positivity. And this is a picture from Belfast, little red line. This is a peace wall. We have as many peace walls now as we had when the Troubles ended in 1998. So these walls aren't coming down, which is just now there's a little bit of progress in that, but nowhere near fast enough. Nowhere near fast enough. And some of the more recent developments, the demographic information. So the census returns are saying that whereas unionists used to be in a sort of like a strong majority, it's more or less 50-50 now. So the population is more or less 50-50 in terms of, you know, the different communities. Let's call it two main communities, and that leading to a real uncertainty. Brexit is has been, anybody follows the news, especially in the UK, Northern Ireland has been a source of major contention about what to do about Northern Ireland, because, you know, I could do a whole talk on that alone, so I don't want to go there, okay, but basically it's been very, very complicated and continues to be very, very complicated. Social values revolution in the Republic of Ireland, that has played into, you know, historically the Republic of Ireland was actually socially very conservative, and then in the space of a generation, it's probably become one of the most you know, liberal countries in the world. I think it was one of the first countries in the world to pass laws for equal marriage, for example. And then COVID-19 has been an interesting one, whereby, you know, some people believe our local assembly could have fallen, but I talked earlier about purpose, because there was something that united all the parties, and that was saving lives. They're able to put apart their differences to focus on something. And this idea of having an agreed purpose, having something bigger than ourselves that overrides our individual interests and needs, is absolutely key. And there's a real struggle for that to actually happen. But there's a silent hope, not to be despondent. There's absolutely no desire to return to the past. And there are a lot of warnings, and people get excited and say certain things, and a lot of politicians will wind up things to you know, make it think that we're close to that again. I personally don't believe. I hope I'm never proven wrong. I personally do not believe that. I really do. You know, I look at my kids. My oldest daughter is now 18. When she was 13, she came into my house one day and she said, "Daddy, are we Catholics or Protestants?" She didn't know. And when I grew up, that was something you were taught that within, as soon as you could speak. You were told who you were and why that was important. Okay, so there is change happening, but we can never be, what's the word for it, take it for granted. Because the people who live in this development, I live in a very nice area. The people who live on the other side of this wall, you know, they're living in a reality whereby, and going to different schools, you know, mightn't be asking that question still. Okay, so lots still to be done. The journal article that I put a lot of effort into was looking at the whole idea of sociality. So I'm going to get to the main part where I'm going to ask you all to reflect on the conflict, but just to show you how I use this here. And probably for me, the actual interview process was one of the most powerful experiences I ever had or been involved in, and I explain why in a little minute. Some of the key concepts, not to throw it up, but sociality, all you folk will know, to the extent that one person construes the construction process of another. You know, what a beautiful thing. He may play a role in the social process involving the other person. And we use the down the very bottom here, the perceived element grid. And this quote here, help people explain how they see other people. And this is the key thing in Northern Ireland, that we don't take time out to think about how we see other people and how they are seen by them, and to articulate the nature of that relationship. We just don't do it. We don't do it. It just doesn't happen. And that's, for me, was a very powerful process to be involved in. And just to explain what the objectives were, was to try and see two communities, how the two communities perceive each other, and how each community believed they were perceived by the other was the crunch I was trying to get to. And the second objective was to ascertain if the information captured using the PEG, or perceived element grid, can be useful in supporting revised individual and collective cross-community narratives, what we're trying to do. Sorry, and just go back here. And the conclusions, by and large, okay, were that, you know, the research identified patterns of self and relational construing between members of the nationalist and unionist communities, and provides a framework for assessing the potential, you know, for the development of sociality. So we didn't get to the point of developing sociality, because one of the critiques was that while I interviewed people and got them to reflect on a number of questions, I didn't bring them together at the end to talk to each other. Okay, so it was very much an initial piece. But what we also concluded as well was that the work identified using the PEG, you know, useful, provides a tool for assessing how members of different communities understand each other in the context of social conflict, and one which could be useful in helping individuals. So I really believe there's something in this, and I hope somebody else can take this work and move it on and develop it further. But I think there's something in the approach that we took. and needs more development. And just to show you who we interviewed, basically, I interviewed 12 people, 6 from each community. I purposely picked people from the 4 main parties. Now, if I was saying the 4 main parties today, this is 2017, these would not be the 4 main parties, because what has happened, the middle ground has grown. So at the point of writing in my research, these 4 parties represent 85% of the population. Today, they only represent about 80% of the population, because the middle ground, so the community that doesn't identify as unionist or nationalist has growing, and it continues to grow. Whether that will continue to grow or not is a question, because what's happened, one of these particular parties, also Unionist Party, recently has become more liberal in its outlook, and that might actually stop that middle ground from growing. Okay, we'll see what happens. And I interviewed politicians. I can't use their names, but 2 of the politicians I interviewed were number 2 in charge of particular parties. So I got senior people involved, providing that their names are never used in terms of the research. And in terms of the way we worked it, for the number of what I call construals, from the unionist community, I looked at what we call the present, where we are in the present time. I looked at it in the future, and I'll show you how I've done it in a minute, but at 190 construals from a unionist point of view in the current, 158 from the nationalist community. And I talked about an imagined future, and I had 91 in the unionist community and 110 in the nationalist community. So an awful lot of data was gathered in terms of in different construals, in terms of the things that people shared. And just to show you the model that we used, effectively, for each person interviewed, I asked them to think about the present. Think about the present. And actually, the first thing I asked everybody interviewed is just, how did you come about your views? I was a bit controversial. I asked them, were you born with them? And people started to laugh and going, oh yeah, it made them just reflect. But basically, I got people to reflect upon the following questions. So I asked them to think about where they are right now, and for the community that they're in, how your community sees themselves. I let them reflect upon that. I then let them reflect the other community. And there's 2 communities here, and it was very obvious. There's no introduction required for anybody what community they're in. The other community, how your community sees the other community, and I got them to speak about that. And then for the other community, I got them how they think the other community sees them. How they think the other community sees them. And then how they think the other community sees themselves. And this is inspired by using Harry's peg. Okay. And once they've done that, in that part interview, and I captured that data and that information, I asked them then to imagine a future. And in that future, things had worked out. You're now getting on really well with the other community. Things have worked out. And in that future status, that imagined future, I asked them to think how your community needs to see themselves. I asked them then how your community needs to see the other community. How do they need to start thinking about the other community? Start seeing them. I asked them as well, saying, how do you think the other community need to see them? And I asked them, how do you think the other community need to see themselves? And all I can say is that these interviews, and I don't know if my paper has done it justice or not, but these interviews, and I've done a lot of things in life, were the most powerful interviews I've ever been involved in, ever. To the point whereby I felt transformed afterwards, just by being honored by listening to people going through these questions. And because you could see people making shifts in their thinking. And so I think there's something in it, this approach. I don't know how it'll be used in the future. I've started bringing into coaching and got it, in that book I was telling you about, and I've started bringing into my coaching work in terms of conflict resolution. But from a point of view of Northern Ireland, I don't know where this goes next. But part of me is just leaving it out there to the world and seeing what happens and what maybe somebody else can use it somehow. What I'm going to ask you to do then, and we're going to allow you half an hour for this. I want you to think of a conflict. Yeah, agree in a world style of conflict. So we're going to put you in the breakout groups of 3 in a couple of minutes time, but we want to make sure, first of all, everybody's clear on what we're asking. when you get in your breakout groups, to pick, remember at the very, very start, I listed all those different conflicts, and we listed all those things that we've interest in. I want you to try as a group to agree in one of those topics, be it Brexit, be it whatever. Okay, agree on one of those conflicts, and to take the view of one of the parties to the conflict. Now, if you have time and you're very super fast and you want to do both parties to the conflict, even better. But realistically, time-wise, I don't think you'll have time for that. So take the view of one of the parties to the conflict, put yourself in their shoes. I want you to work through the 8 questions. But take the present as it is right now, and take the future. You know, if we resolve the future, you know, what will we have to be saying? I want you to discuss how you could use this approach, or how it could be useful. Well, afterwards we'll discuss how we could use this approach, or how it could be useful in the conflict of that particular conflict. Just getting some feedback on how it was to use it. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to go back 2 slides here. I'm going to ask you, just using your camera, if you want to take a photograph of this one here. But if as many of you take photographs as possible, and then at least somebody in the group will have a photograph of this, okay? And just change the word community. That if you're talking about Palestine, Israel, you know, you're taking the perspective of one of those areas. If you're talking about Brexit, you're changing the word community to leave or stay. If you're talking about America, you're taking you know, extreme right or extreme left, or left or right. You know, how the left sees themselves, how, you know, just change the word community to every word. And if you want to take a picture then of this one here for the future one, get pictures of that one as well. Has everybody got pictures of that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe just if you want to take a picture of that as well, there's no harm in having it. Okay. So it's taking the view of one of the parties to the conflict and just working through the 8 questions. And you might tweak them a little bit, but you get the essence of what I'm talking about. And just seeing how that feels to do that. And put yourself in their shoes, okay? Harry, any comments before they go into the breakout groups?
Sorry, did you ask?
Yeah, have you any comments before we go into the breakout groups?
Yeah, what are the 8 questions?
Yeah, just go back using the pictures in the last 2 slides.
Oh, I see. Each one of those bullet points is a question.
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So use the pictures. That's the fun bit. And any questions, come back and ask. Okay. Okay. What I'll maybe do, I'll maybe join the different breakout groups to make sure you're all okay. So let's see. So Sam, how many do we have in breakout groups? How many are just leaving now? Okay.
We've got 3 breakout groups at the moment. Room 4 is empty. Oh no, your room 4's got Yelena. Yelena needs somebody in with her. Okay, various people are leaving at the moment, so just give them everybody a second just to join if they can. And then we'll have to shift people around.
That's okay.
Room 2 is a good place for you to go to. There's Seamus and Andre in there. Harry and Jane are in one. Yelena and Nicola in one. Okay. I think that's it at the moment, Paul. Looks like everybody's joined. Do you want to go to room 2?
Yeah, and Peter and Sharon, you go in the rooms, I use. There's a couple there on the screen still. And Michael, are you going to go in the room? Are you going to stay here? You're mute, Michael.
I want to go in one. I will put myself in one that doesn't have people.
Okay.
Okay. Room 3 or 4 would be good, Mike.
Okay.
Seamus, yeah.
Right,
Sandra,
I
do you wanna-
haven't been put in a group, so if you could, please.
Oh, you are in a group, Peter. You're in room 3.
How do I get there? Nothing came up. Oh,
Oh, hang on a minute. I will see if I can move you. Mike, how do I get Peter into room 3?
Let me see what I can do.
move
I'm
your
Stuck
magic.
in room
Right.
3 and I can't move you from there at the moment. It says you're in room 3.
Yeah,
Right.
you should have something on the bottom of your
On the
screen.
bottom of your screen, yeah, that says
That-
join
that,
room 3.
Well, I did last time, but not this time. Oh,
Oh, interesting.
Okay,
gonna
I can't
try something
find you
strange.
to
I'm gonna-
change. I can move you.
hang on, I've just
I
gone
just-
to her. I found it now.
I just moved him to room 2.
Okay, you're in
good. So
room
now he's
2
in
now.
room 2.
Okay.
Right.
Paul,
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you, would you?
Oh, why don't you?
Yeah.
where
Sam,
should we
would
move you to?
I just before you move me,
Yeah.
you ever just maybe when the 20 minutes gone, just say 20 minutes left, 15 minutes left, just to do a wee note. You know, you can do a wee.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just keep.
Yeah, I will. Okay.
So again, if anybody, let's see. Yeah, put Michael and myself in different groups, probably.
Well, go to room
Yeah,
2 then. And
And
Mike, you can go
Harry's
into
a-
3 or 4.
Yeah, keep us away from Harry because Harry knows what you know. And then.
Right. Paul, go to room 2. And
Okay.
Mike, will you go to 4 or 3?
Okay. So. Join bracket room. Room 2, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sharon, are you waiting to be joined or Sharon? Oh, she's not there. Yeah, no. Okay, so that's 5 minutes at least. It's 25. Okay, it's 20 minutes for conversation. I'll do.
Hello, folks. Welcome back.
Hi, everybody.
I'm
Hi.
just going to ask you what conflict you were discussing, and how did that work for you? What did you end up doing? So
It's everybody.
He did the Afghan and versus the West one. Afghanistan versus West. Yeah.
Afghanistan versus West.
Taliban versus West.
Taliban in particular. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you pretend to be the Taliban? Or what's that?
Yes, we were the Taliban.
Oh,
yeah.
brilliant. Okay. I have never spoke to the Taliban before, so now we're going to get some.
Well, I don't know how
You're from
well
Northern Ireland, of
we
course you have.
it was a bit of fixed role therapy. Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? Putting
Yeah.
yourself with a person's
It was
shoes.
really hard,
Very hard.
What does that
but
tell us?
it felt very good for us.
It felt like we were taking on what the West sees rather than what they are, at least for me, a little bit, Yeah.
What does that tell us about ourselves? The fact that we find it so difficult as human beings to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes again.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's particularly difficult with the Taliban because this, the horror of the whole thing and the sense of fruitlessness of the not just 20 but 40 years of intervention by other countries in the country.
Yeah.
So downhearted, and it was quite threatening to. And yet, I know with my constructivist head on, if you like, that it's absolutely vital to do, and that one needs far more materials. I mean, if I've been trying to get into Cameroonian culture a little bit because my son is about to marry a Cameroonian lady. They've been going out for 2 years. She was born in London, but her parents are Cameroonian. So, and the way to do that is for me to read a novelist from the country, or reading more of the history and all that.
Yeah.
I've got very little knowledge of the Taliban's origins or beliefs.
Me too.
Can you imagine, though, right, if you were going to meet the Taliban, okay, and you've done some research in their history and personalities and everything else, and you went through a process like that beforehand, would that be helpful? That's a question.
Say it again, Paul.
So if you're going to meet the Taliban, okay,
yeah,
and you've done some research on them, and then you went through a process like that, like questions like that, the question, how helpful would that be? Is the question.
I think I would approach them with great humility and say, well, I understand this and that, but I need to check that with you. A bit like doing Kellyan therapy.
Yeah. No, subsuming. Yeah.
And their history of being invaded or occupied, whichever word you like to use, for hundreds of years. Because of their position geographically, they have been a strategic place, haven't they? And people of powerful countries over centuries have wanted to have access to their country.
Yeah.
And how does that? Because we've always, if the British tend to get very proud of the fact, well, we haven't been invaded since 1066, but what must it be like to have been invaded or occupied for hundreds of years?
Yeah.
And so much of that has been set up by the Western response and American foreign policy or whatever, Yeah.
And Russians and Chinese and everybody else, yes. Yeah.
What I'm encouraging here is that until I heard a guy, Peter Hawkins, speak. He works in the core area of coaching, and he says, you want to develop your levels of empathy. He said, watch the news at nighttime. If somebody annoys you and starts stirring you, think of them lovingly, and think of the world from their point of view, and what it must be like to be them. I just often find that really, really useful. Pick somebody in the news that's annoying you and say, okay, what is their world? What is leading them to where they are today? And the point of that is that when you meet that person and you speak to them, you're going to have a whole different conversation. You're going to start the conversation with saying, you know what? I understand you've got pains and hurts. I don't agree with you, by the way, but I understand you got pains and hurts. Because a lot of conflict is a fact, and it happened in Northern Ireland, is when we dehumanize the other person. By dehumanizing the other person, we give ourselves the ability to kill them, and that sounds very extreme, but it's true.
It is true, yeah.
If we in Nazi Germany, they burnt the books. They said people weren't important. They said they used the word vermin. People were dehuman. And if you dehumanize somebody enough, even the smartest people in the world can become killers. Or even worse, not worse, but can become a silent majority that sits back and won't take action because they're scared.
You know, I was reading about Heidegger last night, and how when he became a Nazi in 1935, he was going around the universities supporting the policy of burning books. And his main teacher was Jewish, Husserl. And it just made me think, how can this happen? You know?
Yeah.
And the questions kind of happened again. You know, that's the part I think we're in an age now, and from a media point of view, that was it filter bubbles on I think Mike, you mentioned America left and right earlier on. Filter bubbles in social media show you what you believe, you know. So if you start looking at certain content, you get shown more of that content.
Yeah.
And you don't get shown content of things you disagree with. Like, and if you think of where we are today, we're actually in an age whereby we get fed information that confirms what we already believe.
Oh, yeah.
That to me is terrifying. And then you can pay money as a political party to feed people information based on, you know, give them more of that.
One of the main things that filter bubbles particularly leave out is not identifying what people need in relation to yourself and how you can meet that need. And empathy is ultimately about recognizing the need in somebody else and meeting that need, and knowing that you have being empowered enough to do something towards meeting that need. And everything we have going on at the moment seems to be more about identifying people as being as different as possible from you, and therefore not having identifiable need.
Yeah.
Othering.
And therefore you not being able to abdicate your responsibility towards them as another human being.
To make yourself feel better in contrast to them.
And either to be able to give yourself the excuse to hold on to your own resources, or to be able to feel that I'm not the same as them, therefore I'm different, therefore I'm better. This idea that different must automatically be better is such a dangerous one.
And doesn't that also be echoed in our view of punishment? That I think Kelly talked about this, didn't he? That we punish people just to prove that they're not like us. And that starts in school, and it starts in, you know, everybody in the lot, doesn't it? Just to prove that they're not like us.
And sometimes we punish people because they are like us, and there's the bit of us we don't want to recognize, or we don't want to own, and so we'll project it onto them.
What other groups? Can other groups speak a little about how they found things? So,
what conflict did you pick? Yeah, any other groups? What conflict did you pick?
We picked the same one, but it wasn't the West versus the Taliban. It was the Afghan people who are not Taliban versus the Taliban.
Ah, that's interesting.
Very
We
interesting.
tried to be both.
How do you get on, Jenny? Tell us a little bit about how you get on.
Well, it was really difficult.
Very difficult.
Especially when it came to the future. We had the not Taliban people identifying themselves as people with aspirations for freedom and equality, proud of their culture and history, and wanting to do business. And that they would have to change to view themselves as compromising, confident, and having some sense of agency in a new settled Afghanistan. That the Taliban would view themselves as upholding strict Islamic values, protectors of morality, that they view themselves as belonging to something with a purpose, And we came up with a lot of ways that they would have to change how they see themselves, but we couldn't see ways for them to do it. Things like being able to talk and not shoot, and to see themselves as peacemakers, see themselves as having some kind of international status so that they could talk to other countries.
Yeah.
Be able to, sorry, I can't read my own writing here. Perhaps be less threatened by others. Acknowledgement of their family of origin as being as vital as their brotherhood.
Jessica, can I ask a question that's slightly indirect to that? I was going to ask you, Andrei, from Russia, what the Russian newspapers or the media or the culture generally are thinking about what's happening now, given that Russia was in Afghanistan before this coalition went in there. Just so, I hope it doesn't cut across too much, but just genuinely interested in.
It is very difficult to say because we have the Taliban prohibited organization in Russia, but now our officials start dealing with Taliban. What about the past? In past, we fight at Taliban. The war that was between Soviet Union and Afghanistan was against Taliban. So we have some ideas that we were right from the beginning. And
is there a feeling that, well, we tried it and now they've tried it and it's failed?
I don't think in Russia we have a very complex attitude towards the Afghanistan war, because it wasn't the war where the interests of the Soviet Union were clear. And we had many problems with the people who returned from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And there was no sense in this war. So now it's not the war we invested in emotionally. Now we think that probably we can play as negotiators between
to take a role there.
Yes, but I doubt it.
I guess, Jenny, what I'm thinking there as well, that, you know, you're saying it's difficult to use it, and it is a difficult thing to go through those sort of questions and imagine, especially if we're not in that world. But imagine, okay, the group that done the Taliban, the group that done the Afghan people who aren't the Taliban, you know, having to both do that and then coming together. And I guess the question on my mind is always like, if a person's views, people ask about the Taliban, have they, for example, have they mellowed, is the big question we're all asking right now. So have they become less restricted in their very instructions? And that's the big $1 million question we don't know, and time will tell. And when somebody,
I can't believe that the new generation, you know, they're 20 years on, aren't they? And they're going to be reacting against possibly the old way of doing things.
Yeah, we'll see. Like, and I guess the question is, if you get to a point whereby somebody is so constricted in their views and they're not open to having that dialogue, what do? You know, and I think that's where that's difficult stuff, and that's where wars happen and conflict happen. You know, I said physical conflict rather than actual, you know, democracy or discussion. I remember hearing one time that politics is war without blood. But as much as our politics can be broken sometimes, I think it's important that we support the political discourse, because the alternative, which is blood, is just, that's when politics fails effectively. You know, and we have to be so careful, because it can happen. And I see it happen.
something you said earlier on, Paul, was to do with how in Northern Ireland when things changed, when the more liberal parties who had been in government stepped back and the more extreme parties took over, and when the leaders of those parties, like it would have been Ian Paisley on one side and Martin McGuinness on the other side, actually died, and then other people moved on, a new group of people took over, and the dynamics within that organization changed, and other factions within the organization changed. I think that's got to be true for the Taliban as well. The old people are still there, but and they have very long memories in those days, but we have very long memories in Northern Ireland as well. But the people who fought the Soviets are not there anymore. They still have the memory of it, and because things are very family related, what's going on in the Panjshir Valley, they still remember that they fought the Soviets, that they fought the Taliban, and they're fighting the Taliban again. But that there's a changing of the guard every so often, and there's a battle for ideas every time there's a changing of the guard.
And I agree, Seamus, but one of the things I did come across one time was research on conflict resolution that has shown that in world conflicts, it's easier for the protagonists of war to make peace than those that follow. I just found that fascinating, and I think of Northern Ireland, it was Paisley and McGuinness and those people who were involved in things. You know, it's like the warriors can make peace, but the people who come behind sometimes have a more difficult path to journey, because they maybe haven't been in the battle and they don't carry the credibility to bring the troops with them nearly. So,
and also it's the same thing happened in South Africa. People, the warriors make peace, but it's the generation that follows that has to do the governing. And if they've not grown up in a system where government, there is a structure for government, there's a structure for war, but there's not a structure for government. They're starting from square one. They have to learn. And the people you're learning from are the people who used to be your enemies. So whose pattern do you pick?
So any other groups? What other groups discussed, and what position did they take?
Well, there was our group with Yelena and Nicola, and we looked at the abortion issue, and if I could share my screen, I could show you what we did. We tried to reproduce the grid into pro-choice and pro-life. And so we said, how does the pro-choice see itself? Pro-choice folks were standing up for themselves, exercising their rights, believing in the rights of women. They felt they were morally right, progressive, believing that a fetus is not a person at birth. How the pro-choice people, how we thought pro-choice people view pro-life folks as religious nut jobs, as crazy, controlling, authoritarian, uncaring about women's bodies, misogynistic, privileging the right of fetus over women, believing the fetus is a person, etc. How pro-life people see pro-choice people as selfish, too liberal, perhaps as radical feminists or man-hating, immoral, lacking in traditional morality or religion, rejecting of family values, embracing relativism rather than absolutism, irresponsible Marxists, postmodern Kellyans. How pro-life people see pro-life people as morally correct, as generally caring about the child, of protecting the fetus and the family, of having true values, having a mission to save the countries, embracing traditional roles and naturalism, the belief in the sanctity of life at birth, etc. And what we did after that was we tried to play around with the idea of, well, how would you get these two camps together? And one of the things we focused on, only a little bit though, was we tried to come up with made the observation that it is likely that both the pro-choice and the pro-life folks both have an interest in reducing unwanted pregnancies. So that like choice people are, it's unlikely that there's a real lot of them who say, hey, abortion's good. We want to have more of it. They just want to have the right to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we thought that maybe if we were to ask the question, well, how can we reduce unwanted pregnancies, that you might be able to begin to generate some consensus about at least some ways, or even about the undesirability of unwanted pregnancies, and that could at least be a start.
Yeah.
Good point. Although, unfortunately, some of the pro-life people would be against birth control. Some of them. So that would
that's what Nicholas said when we talked
Yeah.
about that. I think it was Nicholas who said that.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say, I think maybe it's because of the mostly I was thinking about the rhetoric that is in United States, at least the way I'm seeing it in Serbia, between pro-life and pro-choice. So maybe that's why I kept thinking in that pro-lifers that are very impermeable about what constitutes as okay stance on abortion. I don't know if I'm being clear here. So maybe it is actually possible to imagine some different pro-life discourse that is much less restrictive on the issue of abortion. So yeah.
When the debate took place in the Republic of Ireland about the referendum for abortion a couple of years ago, I know somebody that was on the pro-life side, quite a senior person, and they were quite frustrated that they've been pushed into a corner of being because they actually were somewhere in between. Said the way the debate happened, that there was no in between existed.
Yeah.
It was either.
We wondered if the Taliban felt that sort of feeling as well.
Yeah, misunderstood, and people did. Yeah, I had that experience as well, feeling misrepresented, and it was very black and white. You're either one or the other. There was no allowing for. Well, look, I'm not for the different reasons people might have wanted to be against it. Yeah.
I think sorry, Matt, carry on.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Sorry, I'll just put my thing on mute.
What I was just going to say is the danger, of course, is of designing an argument around two camps, is that you're never talking to two camps. You're actually talking to multiple people in multiple camps. And unless you are able to shift your constructs and dilate them sufficiently to allow conversations to happen across different groups and sort of subgroups, you're actually not going to be having conversations with real people. You're having conversations with people who are having to take on an identity that is related to the group that they've now been assigned, really. And so in the end, you're actually talking to nobody.
And Sandy, I love that. If you could capture those words somewhere, it sums up so much of what's happening in the world. And we're not talking at it. And Michael, you mentioned back in 2018 at the Edinburgh conference that we're not addressing each other's needs. I think we're addressing each other's interests. And it's a similar thing to me. We're not talking about our deeper human needs. We're just talking about our stated positions.
What I wanted to say before was a riff off of what you had said before when you talked about needs, and what Sandy said when she talked about empathy. And that for me, the word plea has been coming up. It comes from Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas, and his moral philosophy. He says, that behind the face of the other is always a plea. And for him, he said, the plea is don't kill me, but it could be anything. What is the plea? We think of the need. What's the plea of the person, the pro-life person? What's the plea of the Taliban? To think of it that way as there being a plea. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but the plea suggests that there's that there's a human something in there that we can find some compassion for, even if we don't agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I just point out that we're actually over time?
Okay, yes.
And we need to just thank Paul very much for an incredibly interesting session. And if that I don't want to just chop it. I mean, are there any final important thoughts? I thought Michael's contribution about Levinas was probably a very nice final statement. But it's good to see you, Guillaume, as well.
It'd be interesting to do one with constructivists versus other modalities, wouldn't it? That'd be an interesting one, because we have at some stage.
Yeah, for me, I'm just looking to provoke debate and provoke us to think, are we doing enough in media, in education, in all walks of life, to actually think this way, use this sort of approach to say, what is it like to be the other person? What is it like to think differently? And if we did, what difference could we make if we brought that more into our dialect?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting.
Thanks very much, Paul. Yes. Thanks, Harry. Thanks. Nice to meet everyone.
Hooray.
Take care.
Thanks for guys.
Yeah.
Well done.
Okay, and see you next 2 weeks' time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Well.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, well done, Paul. Lovely session.
It was terrific.
Thank you, Paul. That was really good.
I need debate going. Probably, there's a couple of things that changed, but that's not always my self-critique side of me. But that's okay. But it's getting the debate going. There's so much in that. There's so many things you could talk about. I'm really happy, actually, Michael, your group on abortion, because that's one very good example. Something actually.
Yeah, so the other folks picked it. I was late. They had already picked it. I can't take any credit for that.
Yeah, that's good.
You did a lovely grid on it.
Yeah, very, very impressed. Very, very impressed.
Yeah, it's an impressive grid. Who created that idea of the peg grid?
Was that person, Michael, do you?
I like the way you started it, built up the workshop as well, with the personal stuff and the stuff about the grandma's.
That was really good, Paul.
Very moving.
That was very connecting. And
the bombs, there's nothing like seeing the bomb buildings to remind you of the horrific.
Yeah, I guess it's something making things real. That it's not some statistic. It's a real, and for those people, when I talk about friends who said you're a traitor, like that's a really horrible thing to be called a traitor by a friend, but I understood that. Even I've always been able to empathize with other people quite easily. So I totally understood their pain and never denied it. Well, the media and everything else, we don't really do that. We just sort of
the media is so bad. Successful piece of work. Congratulate ourselves.
That was very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all your support, Sandy. Thank you very much for doing all the rooms and everything. I know I've done that so many times. I know what it's like. So you don't bring it.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you for doing your work. That was really good.
Thank you, Harry.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we should congratulate ourselves for what Paul did. I think we should definitely do that.
I think we should congratulate ourselves that we've launched again.
Michael and Harry, I couldn't have done my stuff without both of your inputs, so thank you. You know that as well, so I hope you know I appreciate it. I appreciate both of your inputs.
Are you able to make most of these sessions, do you think, or some of them?
It's better for me time-wise because my week is generally...
I'm rather worried, talking about the committee, that basically I think we might have lost a couple of members, and I think a couple more might be too busy or whatever it is. But I mean, I don't want all the pressure to. I mean, Sandy did the breakouts today, and it's quite a business, isn't it? I haven't done it myself actually, and I don't really want to. But Jeanette and Yelena were very active doing that. It's just thinking if you could almost give us a bit of a hand if you are around, and there's,
that's okay.
But only if you're wanting to go to that session as well.
I'll let you know if I'm at a session. You can let you can rely on me to do breakout rooms and all that sort of. I don't mind doing all that sort of stuff. Like, so.
I mean, you're obviously very knowledgeable about how to do it as well, so that's great. Okay, shall we call it a day then? And great to see you, and thanks for all of you for everything.
And Harry, just one question.
Can we turn the recording off?
Yes.